Welcome to Thriller Vault. Tonight I have the creepy true story of Principal Perfect. This story is sourced from The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout, one of my favorite books of all time. Quick disclaimer, I have edited, paraphrased, and changed the point of view to make this into a story. Some minor details may be speculation and or fiction, but the main details are true according to Martha Stout's book. Here is Principal Perfect. Hannah was 22 years old, a fabulous student, due to start medical school in September. But something really bad happened, and she couldn't focus on anything else. She didn't know how she'd complete medical school if she couldn't cope. Her father wouldn't approve, but her mother encouraged her to see a therapist. Hannah sat in the armchair opposite Dr. Stout in her swivel chair. A clock ticked in the background. Hannah's face felt hot, not sure she should even be there. After a brief introduction, Dr. Stout asked Hannah why she was there. "I wanted to talk to someone because my father's in prison." Hannah then explained how her father killed a man. "He didn't mean to. He broke into our house." Hannah was quite stoic in her depiction of her father's incarceration. She told Dr. Stout more about her father. He had been the principal of a public high school in the Midwest. Her father was extremely charismatic. Everyone loved him. His students, the teachers, the community. He was always at the football games and cheerleading practices. He was patriotic, with strong conservative values. Hannah was his only child, and for as long as she could remember, her father told her she could be whatever she wanted to be. She could even be a doctor. Hannah said, "He's the sweetest, most moral man in the world. He really is. You should have seen all the people who came to the trial. They cried and cried for him." It happened at night, in March. Hannah was a college sophomore then. She was home on spring break. She heard a really loud noise outside. At the time, Hannah didn't know it was a gunshot. Hannah went downstairs and found her mother standing in the front doorway, weeping. When she saw Hannah, her mother yelled at her not to go outside. Her father eventually came back inside. He was only wearing his pajama pants. "He looked fine," Hannah said. "He didn't look afraid or anything. For a second I thought everything would be okay." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. "My mom asked, 'Is he hurt?' My dad said, 'I think I hurt him really bad.'" Hannah shared more details about the break-in with Dr. Stout. Hannah's mother had heard the glass window breaking. Her father had loaded the gun he kept in their bedroom closet. Her mother had begged her father to call the police, but he had gone downstairs to confront the burglar. The burglar had run out the front door at the sight of her father. Her father had given chase and shot at the intruder. As one of her father's attorneys later described it, by sheer blind luck, the bullet hit the man in the back of the head, killing him instantly. The case was plastered over the local media. The shooting had taken place in a safe suburb. The shooter was a high school principal, a pillar of the community, a sober man with no history of violence. The dead man was a felon and a drug addict who had just broken into the house. The case hit many hot-button issues: victims' rights, gun control, self-defense. The ACLU and the NRA got involved. 2 trials and an appeal stretched the case for over 2 years. Hannah's father was finally convicted of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to a maximum of 10 years, although he could be paroled in 2. Protests arose, as many weren't happy to see a principal sentenced to 10 years in prison for shooting a burglar in his front yard. At the conclusion of their first session together, Hannah and Dr. Stout agreed to meet on a regular basis. After Hannah left her office, Dr. Stout paced in front of the tall windows that overlooked Boston's Back Bay. She thought, "There's something very unsettling about Hannah's story. Why didn't Hannah ask the most important question? Why did her father shoot the gun when he could have let the man go?" Dr. Stout wondered if maybe Hannah didn't really want to know the answer. During subsequent sessions with Hannah, Dr. Stout learned more about Hannah's father. "He's really proud of me," Hannah said. "That's why he can't stand it when I make mistakes." Hannah detailed a story from the 4th grade when her teacher sent a note home that she wasn't doing her homework. For her transgression, her father didn't speak to her for 2 weeks. Then there was this time in high school, his high school, when I had this terrible blemish on my cheek, Hannah said. He didn't say a word to me. He wouldn't even look at me for like 3 days. He's such a perfectionist. I guess he wants to show me off. And when I'm not perfect, he can't do that. Hannah talked about another time when her mother was seriously ill with pneumonia. She was in the hospital for 3 weeks, but her father never went to visit. He was concerned that his pale and sickly wife wouldn't get her beauty back. Hannah's mother did recover and did get her beauty back, the same beauty that made her a homecoming queen when she was in high school. Hannah's father loved to brag about that. Did your mother ever get mad at your father? Dr. Stout asked. No, my mother's so sweet and gentle, Hannah replied. She likes to garden and does charity work. She's just a really nice lady. She's perfect. The only flaw she has, if you can even call it that, is vanity. She's really beautiful, and she knows it. And Dad's really good to her about that. He sends her flowers when he's gone and tells her how beautiful she is. Where does he go? Dr. Stout asked. Hannah fidgeted in her seat and looked away. I don't know. Sometimes he'd come home really late, or he'd be gone the whole weekend. It was weird. I tried to ignore it. The next week, Dr. Stout asked Hannah if her father had ever been physically violent with her or her mother. Of course not, Hannah replied. I can't imagine it. If anyone else ever hurt me or Mom, I think he'd kill them. Dr. Stout waited to see if Hannah's words would affect her, but they didn't. So she tried a different approach. Is there anything you'd like to change about your father? Hannah chuckled, although she didn't sound happy. It's a silly thing. It's, well, sometimes he sort of flirts with my friends, and it bothers me. Now that I say it out loud, I know it sounds ridiculous. I know it shouldn't bother me. How does he flirt with your friends? Dr. Stout asked. Some of my friends are really beautiful, you know, especially my friend Georgia. Anyway, he flirts. He winks at them. He kind of grabs them and tickles them. And sometimes he makes suggestive remarks. Like he'll say, going braless today, Georgia? I know I'm probably misinterpreting. I know this must sound so dumb. If I were in your place, it would bother me a lot. Really? You know, at my dad's high school, parents have made some claims against him, saying that he was inappropriate with their kids. I don't know how many. I heard about 3 of them. Everybody in the community came to his rescue, though. What do you think about that? I don't know. I guess my dad does some things that people might misread. Like if my dad walks up behind a 16-year-old girl and puts his hand around her waist, I can understand why parents might get mad. Dr. Stout nodded and jotted a note in her notepad. I've never told anyone this, Hannah said. This one time, this girl I knew sat next to me in the library and wrote me a note that said, Do you know what your father told me about Central High? I wrote back, I don't know. Passed the note back. She wrote, He told me that Central was like a sexual cafeteria. She put sexual cafeteria in big quotes too. At many of the sessions with Dr. Stout, Hannah talked about weird phone calls her mother had been receiving. What kind of weird calls? Dr. Stout asked. I think they're just crank calls, Hannah replied. I don't think they mean anything. Did your mother tell you what the crank callers are saying? Sort of. My mom gets really upset about it. The basic idea is that they're accusing my dad of dealing drugs or something. Ridiculous stuff. But it really gets to my mom. They're demanding some information that they say my dad has. But he's in prison. He doesn't have anything. Has your mom notified the police? No, she's afraid she'll get Dad in trouble. Hannah eventually flew out to visit her father in prison. When she returned to Boston, she discussed her visit with her father in therapy. I was so worried that he would look terrible, but he looked fine, Hannah said, sitting in Dr. Stout's office. He seemed good, really alive. He seemed happy to see me. He asked about my grades. He didn't ask about Mom, though. Then I just asked him. What did you ask him? Dr. Stout asked. Hannah replied without making eye contact. I asked him what the man was looking for in the house. You know, the man he shot. He wasn't embarrassed at all. He said he was looking for some names, but he didn't find them. I can assure you of that. Hannah looked directly at Dr. Stout. His expression? It was like he was talking about something that was really fun to talk about. I asked him if he knew the guy. Hannah shook her head. He said, "Of course I knew him. I wouldn't kill a stranger." Then he laughed. He actually laughed. Then I asked him if he was involved with heroin. He didn't answer that question. He just said I was smart. Hannah shook her head again and stared at the floor. Did you ask him any other questions? Dr. Stout asked. Hannah raised her glassy eyes. Yes. I asked him if he ever killed anyone else. He said, I plead the fifth. Tears slipped down Hannah's cheeks. Dr. Stout watched Hannah's outpouring of grief, thinking about an Emerson quote. Of all the ways to lose a person, death is the kindest. Hannah eventually wiped her face and her eyes and said, What am I going to do when the lawyers get him out? Dr. Stout said, You'll protect yourself, Hannah. The lawyers did get Hannah's father out of prison, but Hannah has no contact with him. Her parents are divorced, which wasn't because of her father's criminal activity, as her mother refuses to believe he is a criminal. They divorced because Hannah's mother found her father in bed with a 19-year-old former student. Despite all her pain and family instability, Hannah graduated from medical school. But she realized being a doctor was never her dream. It was her father's. So she applied to law school and was accepted to several. She wants to specialize in advocacy and human rights. Thank you so much for watching and listening to Thriller Vault. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. I hope to see you all next week for another thriller story.